Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone. Are you ready to immerse yourself in gripping tales of survival, horror, and the undead? Here, we deliver thrilling zombie stories that will keep you hooked from start to finish. From quiet towns turned to chaos to desperate battles against the rising dead, the Zombie Story Zone is your destination for the most exciting and terrifying zombie narratives. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss an update. Share this story with your friends because everyone loves a good scare. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to leave a comment below. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. Let us know what thrilled you, what surprised you, or what you'd like to hear next. Now, settle in and prepare yourself for a journey into the dark and chilling world of zombies. This is the Zombie Story Zone where the undead come to life.
Music. The town of Cedar Hollow was the kind of place where nothing happened. Life moved slowly, marked by the routine clang of the church bell at noon, the chatter of neighbors on porches, and the occasional whir of a car rolling lazily down the single main street. But on a cold autumn night, beneath a sky heavy with swirling clouds, the stillness was about to shatter. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, a sprawling plot of land dotted with weather-worn gravestones and gnarled trees. It was a quiet, solemn place where the dead rested undisturbed, or so everyone thought. Henry Burroughs, the cemetery caretaker, had just finished his rounds. At 62, his joints ached with every step, but he took pride in his work. He knew every grave by heart, every story behind each name etched in stone. He hummed a low tune as he locked the shed and glanced at the darkening horizon. A storm was brewing, and the wind carried a sharp chill. As Henry turned toward his small cottage, a strange noise stopped him. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic thudding sound coming from deep within the cemetery. Frowning, he squinted into the shadows. The wind howled, masking the noise, but then it came again, louder this time. It sounded almost like pounding. Probably just some kids messing around, Henry muttered to himself. Mischief wasn't uncommon near Halloween, and Cedar Hollow's teenagers had a reputation for testing his patience. Grabbing his flashlight, he trudged back into the graveyard, the beam cutting through the gloom. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Henry followed it to the older part of the cemetery, where ancient tombstones leaned at odd angles and the names had been weathered away by time. The pounding was coming from below. His breath caught. Before he could react, the earth shifted beneath his feet. He stumbled backward, the flashlight tumbling from his grasp. The ground rippled unnaturally, and the first skeletal hand broke through the surface. Henry screamed. In the town square, Sheriff Molly Harper was finishing her evening coffee when the call came through. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Got a report of strange activity near Cedar Hollow Cemetery. Caretakers in a panic. Sounds serious. Molly sighed and set down her mug. Cedar Hollow didn't see much excitement, and most of her calls were about loose dogs or petty disputes. But something in the dispatcher's tone made her uneasy. She grabbed her coat and headed for her cruiser. The cemetery was eerily silent when Molly arrived. The wind had died down, and the stillness felt oppressive. She spotted Henry near the gates, his face pale and his hands shaking. "They're coming out," he whispered, clutching her arm. "Who's coming out?" Molly asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The dead," he cried, pointing a trembling finger toward the graveyard. Molly followed his gaze, and her stomach dropped. The ground was churning in places, and she could see dirt spilling from freshly disturbed graves. A grotesque figure clawed its way out, its flesh rotted and its empty eye sockets glowing faintly. Molly drew her gun, but hesitation gripped her. "This can't be real," she muttered. The thing turned toward her, emitting a guttural groan. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, yet it moved with alarming speed. She fired, the shot echoing through the cemetery, and the creature crumpled. But more were rising. Word spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. People locked their doors, peering through curtains as the undead spilled from the cemetery and began to shuffle toward town. The church bell rang frantically, a desperate warning to the townsfolk. At the local diner, a small group of residents had gathered. Among them was Greg, a burly mechanic, and Sarah, a schoolteacher in her 30s. They had been discussing the odd weather when the first screams pierced the air. "What the hell's going on?" Greg demanded, rushing to the window. "Something's wrong at the cemetery," Sarah said, her voice trembling. A figure stumbled into view, its clothes tattered and its face gaunt. At first, they thought it was a drunk, but then it lunged at a passerby, dragging the man to the ground. Blood sprayed, and the diner erupted in chaos. Greg grabbed a chair, holding it like a weapon. "We have to get out of here." "Where?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. "The church," someone suggested. "It's got thick doors and plenty of room." The group quickly agreed, gathering what they could as makeshift weapons. They stepped into the night, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood and the moans of the undead. Molly was fighting to maintain control as more townsfolk joined her near the cemetery. They brought rifles, pitchforks, and anything else they could use to defend themselves. The undead were relentless, their numbers growing with each passing minute. "Get to higher ground," Molly shouted, firing into the horde. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to rise. Among the chaos, she noticed something disturbing. The undead weren't just aimlessly wandering. They were moving with purpose, their hollow eyes fixed on the town.
Why are they heading there? She wondered aloud. Henry, who had managed to regain some composure, answered grimly. "The bell. The sound draws them." Molly cursed under her breath. The church bell, meant to warn the town, was now luring the creatures closer. "Someone needs to stop it," she said. "I'll go," Henry volunteered, though his voice shook. "You're not going alone," Molly replied, reloading her weapon. The church was a fortress compared to most of the town's buildings. Its heavy oak doors were bolted shut, and the stained glass windows cast eerie patterns on the floor. Inside, the group from the diner huddled together, their faces pale. "Do you think they'll get in?" Sarah whispered. Greg shook his head. "Not if we hold fast." But their hope was short-lived. The pounding on the doors began, slow at first, then more insistent. The sound echoed through the sanctuary, and the group scrambled to reinforce the barricades. Outside, the undead swarmed like ants, their moans rising in a terrible chorus. Molly and Henry approached the bell tower cautiously, weaving through alleys to avoid detection. The streets were littered with overturned carts and shattered glass. "The dead are awake because of something," Henry said as they moved. "This isn't natural." "You think I don't know that?" Molly snapped, scanning their surroundings. "No," Henry said quietly. I think something woke them. It wasn't just random." Before Molly could respond, a figure stepped into their path. At first, she thought it was another undead, but its movements were too deliberate. The man was tall and gaunt, with piercing eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and resonant. "And who the hell are you?" Molly demanded, raising her weapon. The man smiled, a chilling expression. "Just someone who's been waiting a long time for this night." Henry gasped. You're the one who started this." The man didn't deny it. The dead were never meant to rest forever. Tonight, they reclaim what was taken from them. Molly fired, but the man vanished into the shadows. His laughter lingered, sending chills down her spine. "We need to stop that bell," she said, urgency gripping her. The barricades at the church were holding, but just barely. The undead clawed at the doors, their strength seemingly fueled by the unholy energy animating them. Inside, Greg led the effort to keep the group calm, but panic was spreading. A scream tore through the sanctuary as one of the windows shattered and a decaying hand reached through. "They are getting in," Sarah cried, swinging a fire extinguisher at the intruder. Greg rushed to her side, slamming the window shut with a pew. "We need more time." Molly and Henry reached the bell tower as the storm broke, rain pelting down in sheets. The undead swarmed below, their numbers seeming endless. Henry began to climb the narrow staircase, his heart pounding. Molly stayed below, covering him as best she could. At the top, Henry found the bell rope, its thick fibers worn from decades of use. He grabbed an axe from the tower's supply closet and swung with all his might. The rope snapped and the bell fell silent. For a moment, the undead faltered, their movements slowing. But then a deafening roar echoed across the cemetery. The gaunt man appeared again, his eyes blazing. "You think silencing the bell will stop them?" he snarled. "This is only the beginning." The ground trembled and larger figures began to rise, skeletal warriors clad in rusted armor, their weapons gleaming despite their age. The church was nearing its breaking point. Greg and Sarah rallied the group for a final stand, using everything they had to keep the undead at bay. But as the skeletal warriors approached, it became clear that brute force wouldn't be enough. Molly and Henry, now cornered in the bell tower, watched in horror as the creatures began to converge. "We need to end this," Molly said. "What's keeping them alive?" Henry's eyes widened. "The man. He's the source." Molly nodded grimly. "Then we take him out." The gaunt man stood in the cemetery, his arms raised as he chanted in a guttural language. The undead moved in rhythm with his words, their glowing eyes fixed on him like a beacon. Molly crept through the shadows, her gun trained on the man. She had one shot, and she couldn't miss. Henry provided a distraction, throwing a rock to draw the man's attention. As he turned, Molly fired. The bullet struck true, and the man staggered, his chant faltering. The undead froze, their movements jerky and disoriented. "No," he cried, collapsing to his knees. The storm began to subside, and one by one, the undead crumbled to dust. By dawn, Cedar Hollow was eerily quiet. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, surveying the devastation. The church was damaged, the streets littered with debris, but the worst was over. Molly and Henry stood together near the bell tower, their faces etched with exhaustion. "Do you think it's really over?" Henry asked. Molly glanced at the empty cemetery, now eerily still. "I hope so," she said. But deep in the woods, beneath an ancient oak, something stirred.